Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the RDX Sports Podcast. My name is Simon Head, and joining me on this edition of the show is one of the voices of European mixed martial arts, the man who's provided the soundtrack to a host of, dare I say, unbelievable finishes over the last few years. Cage Warriors play-by-play man, Mr. Brad Wharton. Brad, how you doing, my friend?
I am doing very well, thank you. I'm enjoying this beautiful British summer. Rain is my favourite weather, so it's all working out absolutely swell for me.
And you got a hell of a week coming up. Well, a hell of a 6 days, I suppose. It's we've got Cage Warriors coming up this weekend in London, and then hot footing it up to Manchester for obviously a huge week of mixed martial arts up there. So just give us a sense of your schedule as it's laid out for the next week or so, because it must be absolutely crazy.
It is pretty mad. We've got other stuff on this week as well, so I'm really like here, there, and everywhere. We're going to check out a studio for the launch of the second PrizeFighter tournament that we've got coming up in September. So I've got to do that Wednesday, and then I'm going straight to the Fighters Hotel from there. With the event being in London, I only live about maybe 20-30 minutes away from the O2 by car, so I am going to get to sleep in my own bed on Saturday night, which when you'll know yourself traveling to cover events, whenever there's the opportunity to sleep in your own bed, you take it. As nice as a hotel is, there's nothing quite like waking up on Sunday morning and making yourself a cup of tea in your own living room. So I will get that luxury, but then I believe Monday or Tuesday the entire team is up to Manchester. We have a show on Thursday in Manchester, which doesn't give us much time to kind of reset and get ready. So we're all going to be starting to prep for Manchester show before Saturday shows even happened in London. So very, very hectic. But still a nice 3-day weekend afterwards, and August with no shows. So we can all pick ourselves up, stick ourselves back together, and get ready to do it all again for the last 3 months of the year.
Give us an insight into your prep for fights. I know like John Anik from the UFC is incredibly sort of fastidious and detailed about how he pieces everything together for a fight week, but everybody does things slightly differently. So how do you go about preparing yourself to call it's normally a 4 to 5 to 6 hour night of fights, depending on how things go? So, it's not like a 90-minute football match with a very fixed cast. You've got people coming in, loads of debutants and all the rest of it. So how do you go about prepping for a night of fights like we've got coming up?
Well, in school, I never did any homework, and I sort of kept that up through my adult life as well. I think I'm one of those people who, like, if I've got too much on the page in front of me, I almost don't see it. It just becomes a blur, and that you've got so much going on in terms of different voices in your ears and screens to look at, the fight to watch. So I tend these days to make almost like bullet points, really. So I'm not, I don't have pages and pages of stats with, how many wins by armbar this guy's got, or what date exactly he made his amateur debut. I'll just have some basic stuff, and I try and also keep it more to sort of non-stat based stuff. I figure like if you're that interested in the stats, you can go on Tapology yourself and look it up. I'd rather tell you like a funny story from the guy's training camp, or a bit of color about the person's background or personality, or throw back to previous fights, previous performances. I think anyone can sort of do like the numbers stuff. I know a lot of sports fans do like the stats side of things, but personally, I sort of see what I do as storytelling. I like to tell stories, and I'm not the kind of guy that wants to sit with an Excel spreadsheet updating his notes for 3 hours after every event. So yeah, I think it works kind of well for me, doing it like that. And I'm very, very lucky to have worked with some really, really talented color commentators over the years. So I think having that great rapport with the guys I'm working with is much more important than me being able to tell you, what date this guy got a Golga Plata submission in his second amateur A class. You can look that up yourself.
And in terms of how you got into calling fights in the first place, how did that happen? Because there isn't a career path for commentators in mixed martial arts, just as there isn't really a career path for much else in mixed martial arts. You have to kind of crowbar your way in where you can and just sort of make it happen. So how did it happen for you?
A bit of blind luck, really. I at the time I really wanted to write a feature on a real grassroots MMA show, like a a real startup, very very local, that kind of thing. The sort of side of the sport that most fans won't really get to see as much of. And I was talking to a mate about it. We actually lived together at the time, and a lad that he went to uni with was just about to put his first MMA show on. So he sort of put me in touch. They asked me if I wanted to come up and watch the show. It was up in Bolton. And about a week before, the guy rang me up and said, my mate was coming with me as well, who put me in touch with this guy. And he goes, I don't suppose you want to commentate, do you? Because we've not booked any commentators. We weren't really thinking about having them. We haven't really got any proper kit. So can you bring a laptop and just record commentary onto your laptop with a microphone? Can't afford to pay you, so I'll buy you a few beers afterwards. And that's where it started, really. So that show was FCC, which is now on Fight Pass, which has been incredibly cool to sort of be a part of their growth and rise over the years. And Adam, the promoter, is now someone I consider a very good friend. But it sort of just took off from there. I was, again, I sort of didn't really take it mega seriously for that first one, because it was, just me and my mate basically just chatting absolute waffle. But they got me back for the second show, and they had proper mics, proper setup for that one, and I just carried on doing it. And after a while, I just started getting messages of fighters saying that they thought the commentary was good or funny or whatever, and then other promoters started reaching out. And I guess having that platform where I commentated on some pretty big amateur and regional level fights in the UK. I guess all the promoters are sort of watching that on YouTube and hearing the voice and wanting to know who it was. So I just kind of worked from there, really. Obviously, a lot of it is relationship building as well. You've got to you've got to be a man of your word, and you've got to do things on a handshake and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it really started by accident.
And you've got that sort of signature line now, which, the whole unbelievable when you get the finish. Do you remember the first time that it happened? I'm sure it was probably very organic when it happened the first time. And is it something that you sort of saw back and thought, do you know what? That's pretty good. We need to run with this, because everyone needs a signature, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Although, as many of my friends go to great lengths to tell me, Rob Nutley did it first. I actually got to commentate with Rob a couple of years ago for the first time ever. So that was actually pretty cool. And the name of the show, weirdly enough, was Unbelievable. So yeah, the fate's got a funny way of working things out like that. To be honest, I obviously at first it was completely, that was unbelievable, something like that. And I didn't even realize myself that I'd started doing it. And then people started sort of saying it back to me. And I was like, oh yeah, I do actually say that quite a lot, don't I? And nowadays, I tried to stop doing it. I was like, I don't want a catchphrase. I'm not going to be that guy. And then people started complaining. Like, some guy come up to me and goes, oh, I got a sick knockout the other day and you didn't do unbelievable. And people come up to me before shows saying, I'm going to make you say unbelievable. I'm going to do it. So now I just feel like, it's the old Simpsons joke, isn't it? Say the line, Bart. I think I'm that guy now. But, people seem to like it, and I don't mind doing it. So why not?
So is there like a standard that needs to be met in order to achieve an unbelievable on a Brad Wharton commentary? Has it got to be a proper sort of holy shit moment in order to get it? A standard sort of TKO will get something, but it's got to be a highlight reel moment, right, to get an unbelievable.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things that I absolutely love about the UFC broadcast is when they show you the commentator cam. And people will obviously they'll slate commentators just as they slate everyone else, fighters, referees, coaches, everything. But when you watch that and you can see that Joe Rogan, he's been around forever, but he still gets that freak out moment. I just love it, because it's like they're just three guys, absolutely love what they're doing, and they've just seen something that has genuinely made their jaw hit the floor. So that's kind of like, if I catch myself grabbing Dan Strauss's shoulder or something, or like one of the guys will grab me, that's usually when it comes out. Like, again, I don't sort of plan to do it, but then when you see something, you're like, oh my god, yeah, I've got to do it now.
Yeah, and there could be plenty of moments like that this weekend. Obviously, we got Cage Warriors 174, but as part of that, we have PrizeFighter, which is something that I know that everybody at Cage Warriors is incredibly excited about. And I know when it was first announced, it sort of captured the imagination of the the actual fight roster as well. Everyone seemed to be wanted to be on a PrizeFighter list in the bracket, and there was a lot of talk over what weight class it was going to be and who was going to be in and all the rest of it. So talk to us about how this all came into being, because this sounds like the sort of thing where you're sitting in the Cage Warriors office, and I've been fortunate enough, full disclosure, I worked in the Cage Warriors office a little bit a few years back, and it's a small dedicated team and ideas just get thrown around the room. And was it one of those situations where it's like, let's bring back PrizeFighter, let's bring back the one night tournaments? How did all this come into being?
Well, like many a good Cage Warriors story, it all came about when Graham walked into the office and said, right, we're doing this. To which obviously poor Ian Dean's eyebrows shot through the ceiling, and everyone got very, very excited. And then Graham left the office, and we all sort of looked at each other for 3 minutes thinking, how are we going to pull this off? So, Graham does like to come in and drop the old hand grenade every now and again in terms of, we're gonna do a show that's all title fights, or we're gonna do 2 main cards on the same day. So it was kind of another one of those, really. But yeah, the sort of the coming together of it all, it's really driven the team. Like, everyone's really pushed hard on this. Obviously, there's so many aspects of this that a lot of people kind of won't see or won't know about. And from the logistical side of thing, you've got fighters under contract. So if they fight twice in one night, how does that work? Do they have to get a separate contract, or is this going to count for 2 fights? So, if they're on a pay scale where they get paid more money with each win, how's that going to work? Really like boring stuff, basically, but stuff that has to be done behind the scenes in order to make all this work. And then obviously from the media side of things, we've got to sell this as a proposition to people, and who doesn't like a one night tournament? I think anyone who's sort of around my age and got into the sport when I did, tournaments was such a big part of it. And, just as a fan of any sport, tournaments are great. I mean, I don't watch football, but I've been watching the Euros because it's so unpredictable. You don't know what you're going to see in the later stages of it. And I think that's the really exciting thing about PrizeFighter, especially with the fact that, quite unique for this tournament. It's a 4-man tournament, but we had 6 names in the pot and they were drawn out randomly. So going into this, people didn't know who was even going to be in the tournament. And you could say that the guy who would have been the bookmaker's favorite to win it all, Michele Martignoni, the former champion, he's not actually in one of the semi-final brackets. But, should one of these guys get hurt, not be able to continue, all of a sudden you've got an ex-world champion who never lost his belt stepping in. I mean, how often does that happen in other sports? So you've got that crazy nature of like absolute chaos. Both guys who win might not get medically cleared. There's a few other bantamweights on the card, and I believe they're all going to be told, just don't go home after your fight, just in case, because you never know what's going to happen. And obviously, you could be walking away with $50,000 in your back pocket.
Crazy, it's crazy. And yeah, I mean, the thing that leapt out to me was the whole 6-man lineup for what was basically a 4-man tournament. And I was going to ask you specifically about Martignoni, because, as you say, he was the standout name on the list. If you were looking at who's the guy to beat here, it's probably him. But he needs a little bit of misfortune to befall one of the semi-final winners in order to sort of elevate him into the final. But talk to us about this bounty hunter bonus system that also. So obviously there's a prize pot for the winner. There's a tasty. Is it $50,000? Is it for the winner?
$50,000, yeah.
50K for the winner. But they can earn a bit more than that if they want to go a bit Mystic Mac on us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in the day, we did something that was really fun. It was myself, Graham, and someone else, I believe, basically sat in the hotel bar at an event in Dublin and drank a lot of Guinness and came up with, I think it was either 10 or 15 of the craziest finishes we could think of. And we said, right, from this show forward, anyone who ticks one of these off the list gets a bonus for it. And then each one would be removed as it was picked up. So I think that the first one, for example, was a flying heel hook, and someone got it on the first show. So you literally had, I think it was Dean Garnett actually, who's was the submission-based guy, and he was fighting a really tall, lanky kickboxer. And before the show, he was just in the dressing room, just diving at people's ankles, practicing this flying heel hook. So it was great. It brought a different element to the fights. So Graham wanted to bring a version of this back for the tournament. rather than it being something specific, which, you know, you could potentially get a guy, you know, abandoning a game plan or abandoning his style, looking to go after these bonuses. We're going to let the fighters pick a finish themselves. So, for example, you might say, I'm going to win by flying knee in round 2. And if you hit that, you get an extra 10K. So these guys are going to fight twice in one night. They get a prediction for each fight. So we'll find them backstage after they've had the medicals, and we'll get them to record a prediction for the finals. And yeah, if they hit them, that's an extra 10 bags. So potentially you could be walking home with $70,000. And I mean, there's not much I wouldn't do for $70,000 in one day. I mean, obviously, apart from fighting anyone in one of these tournaments, but
that's crazy. That's crazy. So, I mean, how specific do you have to be? I mean, if you're a stand-up fighter, if you're a kickboxing-based striker, you can't just turn up and say, "I'm going to knock him out with a left hand." You've got to be a bit more specific than that, surely.
I don't know. I mean, I think, especially with strikes, you know, it's going to be really open to interpretation. Like, you know, if you're saying like left hook, well, was that really a hook? Was it more of an uppercut? And all of a sudden, you know, we've then got to get 10 experts in and watching slow-mo, and, you know, we haven't got time for that. We've got another show to do on the Thursday. So I think it's going to be something like, you know, maybe you could pick like high kick or flying knee or uppercut, or I don't know is the answer. But I suspect at some point this week, a few of us will be dragged into a room to sort of iron how specific they need to be out. So obviously we're gonna have all the fighters at the hotel this week, and we'll be doing bits of media commitments with them. So they'll be recording their initial predictions then. So I think by that time we'll have maybe like a list of terms and conditions for the bonus system. But I think it's going to be great. You know, I think you're gonna have to be pretty. You know, you're gonna have to need a bit of luck on your side as well to get something that right. But you know, I picked the Warwick score for the Euros final last night, and I know nothing about football, so these guys are going to have a bit of an educated guess than me. I won 160 quid, and if there's 10 grand on the line for these guys, they're going to be thinking about it good and hard, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the potential for 70 grand, right? I think that's like the maximum prize pot you could get. Am I right in thinking there's also a title shot on the line as well? So if you win the tournament, you're next up for the belt. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So winner fights Liam Gittins. As things stand, he's currently our bantamweight champion. So yeah, he's going to be watching on from the sidelines. I think he's already actually come out and said that he thinks if Alexander Love can get down to the weight, so Love's never actually fought at 135 before. He was a featherweight. He fought 140 recently over in Fight Club Rush. But yeah, Liam Gittins has said, look, I think Loof could take the tournament if he can get the weight down safely. And he also obviously fought Luke Riley in an absolute classic last year. Gittins has kind of come out and said, I want to beat him faster than Riley did. So yeah, it's potentially very interesting. And yeah, Liam Gittins is going to be taking a very, very close look at this on Saturday.
Yeah, it's going to be a really, really good night of fights. I mean, Cage Warriors nights at the Indigo are always a little bit special. The venue has kind of a unique setup. You've almost got that sort of old school football crowd sort of feel to it, where because you've got the elevated cage up on the stage, but down on the floor it's all standing, and it's normally absolutely ramming. And you've obviously got the posh seats upstairs with the friends and family are sometimes up there, but the atmosphere in there is pretty raucous at the best of times, and I think it's just going to be cranked up a few extra notches. What's it like for you being able to sit there? You've got the cage right in front of you, but to your left, I think it is from where you're sat, you've got this baying crowd of London fight fans, and as I say, the atmosphere in there is always electric.
It's great, you know. It's I love having to get to my seat. You basically have to walk across the front of the stage. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, it does make you feel like a bit of a rock star when you're walking past and everyone's kind of looking up at you and, you know, talking to fans and that from the stage. It's a pretty cool feeling. You know, I've been to the Indigo to watch boxing. I've judged boxing there, and I've been to a bunch of the bare knuckle shows there, and they have seats on the floor, and it's just not the same. You know, it's not to say it's ever been a bad atmosphere there, but there's just something cool, I think, about, you know, it feels like you're at a gig, you know, that sort of crush up against the stage, and it just gives it that sort of nightclubby atmosphere. And, you know, there's a bunch of fan favorites at the Indigo. You know, we try and keep those guys on the same sort of shows. Like Jordan Vucenic's probably the best example. He comes out to that Chasing the Status song, and everyone just goes absolutely bananas. And you've got people who, aren't there because they've bought a Jordan Vucenic ticket, but they've seen this walkout before. Everyone joins in the singing. Very much like Jack Shaw back in the day in Wales, he came out to a mashup of Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes and Oasis, and everyone just goes mad and sings along. And it's great. The atmosphere is just absolutely fantastic. And as a commentator, that really helps you. To go from having to do it in those empty buildings during the pandemic to having the crowd back, it really lifts you, and you do get taken in by the noise of the crowd. And look, at the end of the day, right, I'm a massive MMA fan, and being part of that crowd and watching fights close up, that's I do it for free. That's what I'd be spending my Saturday nights doing anyway. If I wasn't working there, I'd be one of those people in the crowd, and it's a real privilege. I just enjoy it so much.
Yeah, and it comes across in the commentary. You and Dan have built this great rapport together, and it's genuinely great fun to listen to. Even if you weren't looking at the pictures on the screen, the way it comes across is awesome for a fight fan to just. It's almost like great radio commentary. You almost don't need the pictures sometimes, right? And that really seems to work really well with yourself and Dan. And just something that you touched upon there about commentating in empty arenas during the pandemic. On Thursday, the following week, heading up to Manchester, the BEC, and that was obviously one of the homes of Cage Warriors during the pandemic. That incredible run where you had, I think it was 5 shows at the BEC, and then it was something like 7 or 8 shows at the York Hall. It was an incredible run of events, and it was historic because that was the first time the UK government effectively recognised the sport of mixed martial arts, because an actual legal paper had to be signed effectively to say that we recognise that this is a sporting event, elite sport is taking place here, therefore the event can go ahead. How much of a landmark moment was that, do you think, for MMA in the UK? And what was that experience like? Because everything else in the country was pretty much shut down at that point, and yet you were able to put on those shows and entertain the fans sort of remotely, if you like. Everyone else is stuck indoors, and Fight Pass is streaming it, and we've got these incredible fights going on at the BEC and then obviously the York Hall.
It was great, as you say, a huge moment for the sport to get that government recognition for the first time. That still technically MMA is not officially recognized by the government, but this was one of those steps which is helping it along its way. Obviously, you've got the guys at EMA doing fantastic things on the regulatory side now. Safe MMA, obviously a medical body, and it's all these little things that need to come together. And anytime you can give that process a little kick or a little boost, it is absolutely fantastic. I think it was a huge risk, because had something gone wrong at one of those shows, had there been a COVID outbreak or anything like that, or had the protocols not been followed, those shows would have been done. They'd have been cancelled straight away. The amount of scrutiny that we had, the strictness that we had to impose on people was absolutely unreal. And I think if it had gone wrong, it'd have been really bad for us. It'd been a terrible look for us, and it'd been a terrible look for the sport. But thankfully, the protocols that we had in place, and I know the guys spent so long, working with the government, working with medical people, working with hotels, because all the hotels were shut at that time. We had to find a hotel that would effectively open and give us half of their building that was completely sealed off from anyone. We had everyone in the hotels for a week. You had to be tested before you go in, and then you had to stay in that bubble. It was just a mammoth undertaking. Just to give you like an idea of some of the strictness, one of the York Hall shows, everybody gets off the Cage Warriors coach, and you have to walk straight in off the coach through the back door of the venue. You get checked in at the venue. There was a coach, I believe he was a French or Italian, who'd come over, and he was on the phone at the time, and he's just a million miles away, chatting away to someone at home and queuing to get in. And he just took a couple of steps off to the side, clocked what must have been, I think it was an off license or something, and popped his head in, came out with a bottle of juice, and one of the security staff, hand on the chest, "You've got to go home." So he was immediately put in a taxi, sent to the hotel while we weren't there to get his stuff, and then put on the next flight out of there. That was it. There was no no second chances, no comebacks. You know, you had Paul Morgan Charrier flew over for an event, and one of his cornermen tested positive for COVID. So as an international fighter, he obviously could not get a taxi home, couldn't drive home. He wasn't allowed to use public transport. So he was stuck in a hotel room with his mate for 10 days, not allowed out of the room. Just an insane set of circumstances. As I say, it could have gone very, very wrong. Thankfully, it all went well. Kept the fighters active, which is the main thing. Like you say, that piece of paper from the government saying elite sport goes on here, that meant those guys could train. Now, I know a lot of guys were, training behind locked doors anyway. But it meant, these guys could actually officially be in the gym. And if anyone did turn up, if anyone did try and grass them up for training, they had a bit of paper that said, look, we're allowed to be here. We're elite athletes. And I think for, a lot of those guys, that just did them wonders, because, if you're in your mid-20s and your career's on an upward trajectory, and all of a sudden, we all faced incredible uncertainty at that time. But, if I don't work, I can get another job again in 2-3 years. It's not going to be the end of the world. But for these fighters, they're potentially missing out on the primes of their careers, and the effect that must have on your mental health. It must be absolutely insane. So I think for those guys to have that opportunity, which is absolutely incredible, and the atmosphere at those shows among the fighters, among the staff, it was great. We're all locked in our houses, and then for a week every 3 months, you get to go and see all your mates and all your colleagues. And there was some late nights, shall we say, in those hotels while everyone enjoyed mixing with other human beings again. But yeah, what a time to be alive.
Yeah, I mean, it was a crazy, crazy time, right? And to have gotten through that, and to have had the success that Cage Warriors had, and also you could apply similar things to the UFC with their lockdown shows as well. It seemed to really put the rocket boosters on the sport in some regards, and sport in general, when eventually everybody was let out to play again. It felt like everyone was just so desperate to consume live sport, and the stands were packed, arenas are packed, and all the rest of it. But for you, as part of Cage Warriors, and speaking as someone who's within that sort of inner sanctum, just how much pride was there in being able to have not just have given it a go and tried to make it happen for these athletes, but to have actually gone through the entire pandemic, put those shows on. It wasn't like you just did a one-off. You did absolutely, was it about a dozen or so shows? So there's all these different shows that were put on, all these fighters that were able to continue to make a living during that time. And you did it safely, you did it within the bubble. There were no situations that caused it all to be completely shut down and barred from happening again. How much pride did you and the rest of the team take from that? And has there been a moment where, once everything opened up again, you guys were able to just sit back and go, wow, we actually did that? That's incredible.
Yeah, it was huge for everyone involved. Whether that was the guys in the office back then, or the coaches, the fighters. I think everyone was proud to be involved in something which brought a lot of joy to people, because like you said, there wasn't sport happening at the time, and Cage Warriors as a result got such we put on such a platform, and I think we found a lot of new fans around that time, because there just wasn't MMA on. So all of a sudden, you've got bookies who don't normally offer Cage Warriors odds, but everyone's putting odds on Cage Warriors because there's no sport. I mean, people were betting on marble racing, for God's sake, during the pandemic. Like, these degenerates, they need somewhere to throw their money away. But yeah, it was great. One of the things that I have a real love-hate relationship with Twitter. I'll never call it X. I'm sorry, it's always going to be Twitter for me. I have a real love-hate relationship with it, because I think it's a fantastic little toy to play with. But the negative side of it is absolutely awful. And you see that around MMA events as well. People slating fighters, slating promoters, moaning about everything. But I just remember, I usually keep a tablet up with the Cage Warriors Twitter feed on it, just in case anything kind of pops up while I'm commentating that I want to mention. And it just seemed like everyone was really enjoying the fights. And, you don't always get that on Twitter during fight nights. People are moaning about the quality of a UFC card, or telling a judge of 15 years experience they don't know what they're looking at. And it was just nice for a while that you could tell that everyone had really missed it. And I don't know if it was just because the fighters didn't know when their next opportunity to compete might be, but there wasn't a bad fight in that whole year and a bit, however long it was. We go back and watch shows sometimes in the office, and you look back and you're like, show me where the bad fight was. Show me where you always get a stinker. Usually, it's just the way of the sport. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Crazy wars, huge knockouts, mad submissions. You go back and watch those shows. Like if anyone's a Cage Warriors fan with a bit of free time on their hands, and I had to pick like 5 shows for you to watch, I'd just say take all that trilogy era stuff. It's absolutely bananas.
Yeah, it's, as I say, absolutely crazy time. But to come through it as well as everybody has is remarkable. And the Cage Warriors brand, as you say, seems to have really grown out of that as well. As you say, the international recognition. I think Cage Warriors might have been the first live pandemic event that was on sort of MMA during all of the sort of global lockdown. So all eyes were on Cage Warriors when that all started. So, but that was great. And the reason we sort of started talking about that was it's the BEC Arena, and that's where you're heading back the following week. A big week for UK mixed martial arts. Obviously, we've got UFC 304 on the Saturday. A host of ex-Cage Warriors fighters on that card as well. So we'll mention that in a second. But you've got that second night of fights coming up, making that quick turnaround. I mean, how easy or difficult is it to just roll from one show straight into another? Are you in your routine? Are you kind of, or is it better to sort of stop, take a breather, and then go again? Sometimes it's good to just pick up that momentum and just carry on, right? But I guess it all depends on the prep and making sure there's, all of your ducks are in a row, so to speak.
Mate, if we had time to take a breather between these two, I'd absolutely love it. But unfortunately, my Sunday will not be spent with my feet up watching telly like it usually is. It's all hands to the pump. Look, with the quick turnaround, it's kind of good in a way because you're sort of in that routine of like, okay, you're at a hotel, which staying in a hotel for any length of time and not being on holiday is a bit weird in itself. But you sort of get in that routine, and obviously we all work in the office every day together anyway, and there's a great bunch of people, so we all get on really well. We all enjoy each other's company, and we've all got the same goal, so we're all sort of pulling together. We often travel together, and you kind of need that. You need everyone going in the same direction. It would be great for us to have an extra couple of days, just for that headspace. But I think that once the train starts rolling, it's not going to stop till Thursday night, and everyone's fine with that. And then I've got a 3-day weekend afterwards, and who doesn't love a 3-day weekend?
Yeah, it's gonna be a mad one just because the UFC. I mean, I'll be up there for Cage Warriors, and I'll be up there for the UFC, and the UFC running in the middle of the night is going to be a bizarre one. They did it in Manchester for UFC 204 when Michael Bisping defeated Dan Henderson in the rematch. And I remember that week was a crazy one because we all our little media bubble that we all had, there's probably about 10 of us or so, and we all basically lived fight week on US time, which absolutely ruined us for the week. But by the time fight night came around, everything was rosy because we were on the right time zone. We were able to sort of still be sort of relatively with it by the time the press conference kicked round at the end. But it kind of eliminates that home field advantage to a degree. Obviously, you've got the fans in the stands, but all of the adjustment is kind of on the UK fans. On the UK fighters side, because their biorhythms are the ones that are being messed up, right? I know it's going to be weird for the American-based fighters coming over and having to be awake when it's nighttime and all the rest of it, but they're keeping the same clock. The body clock can stay where it is. How much of an impact do you think that's going to have? When is it going to kind of level the playing field a little bit, or how much of an impact do you think, if at all, it'll be?
Yeah, I think it's going to be weird. I don't always buy into like the whole time zone thing. I think, look, you've got 15 or 25 minutes to fight. Whether you're doing that at X time of the day or Y time of the day, it is irrelevant. No one's yawning and falling asleep in the middle of a fist fight, right? Obviously, like the routine around everything is where it gets weird because, as a fighter, you've got a pretty intense week, right? During fights, you're turning up Monday, Tuesday, and you've got all these media obligations that you might not want to do. You might have to go and get yourself scanned for the video game. You've got to do meetings with the commentators. You've got to do rules meetings. You've got to do interviews. There's going to be a press conference on the Thursday. And all of this is being done while you're cutting weight, which is, one of the most unpleasant bits of the sport as an athlete. You know, a ridiculous practice that for some reason we still can't seem to see the back of, but that's part of it, right? So I think, you know, especially if you're kind of coming over from America to the UK, that messes your body clock up to start with, but then to have to live nighttime is going to be super weird. You know, I know there's some fighters who are already you know, doing it, or already switching to stay up later and sleep in earlier. I think it's how Tom Aspinall's been out in America prepping, so I guess maybe he's just not going to come back to UK time for a while. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know in terms of like an advantage on the night, but you know, for an already incredibly stressful way to spend a week, it's just going to be that one little thing. And look, I think with fighters as well, you know, the actual doing of it might not be the issue, but it's the thinking about it. You know, you've got so much going through your head. If you've lost your last 2 fights, you know, this is do or die. This is your career. You might get cut from the UFC. And, you know, fighters are, you know, they can be superstitious as well. And, you know, they're very used to fighting at a certain time, and they only want to fight, you know, they want to walk down a certain corridor at a certain time because they won last time when they did that. And, you know, you make these little changes and these little complications that are thrown in by stuff like this. You know, you don't want that overactive imagination while they're sat in the bath cutting weight to have more stuff to worry about.
Yeah, and on that fight card, I think almost every fight on the card is like a UK or Irish fighter, or a UK or Irish based fighter against overseas opposition. It's almost like GB and Ireland versus the rest of the world. It's a remarkable fight card, and there's a whole load of former Cage Warrior stars on that card. I mean, I think Christian Leroy Duncan versus Gregory Rodriguez is an absolute banger, and that's quite early on in the night. You've got former champions on the card. Modestas Bukauskas is on the card. Obviously, Christian Leroy Duncan we've mentioned. Paddy Pimblett against, we have to call him King Green now. I understand Bobby Green has now officially changed his name to King Green, although I think Paddy is not having any of that. You're someone who knows Paddy better than most as a fighter. You know, you've been there, you've followed him through, you've called so many of his fights along the way. Just how do you assess his career to this point, and how misunderstood do you think he might be in terms of he's got his fans in the UK who absolutely love him, but he is a polarizing kind of personality. But I don't think there are that many people out there who really know the real Paddy, right? In terms of if you're just a hardcore or just a casual MMA fan, I don't think they really know the real Paddy, do they?
I don't think so. You know, I think, you know, we're all guilty of putting athletes and, you know, people we don't know on this pedestal and then judging them by, you know, a ridiculously high standard that we wouldn't necessarily judge them in if we knew them in real life, or we wouldn't judge ourselves by. And look, you know, Paddy will be the first person to tell you. He just says what's on his mind. He speaks from the heart, and obviously some people love that. Some people don't like it so much. You know, Paddy's the kind of guy that, you know, if you go after him on Twitter, you know, someone else might scroll past. Paddy's going to call you a sausage or a mushroom or whatever, whatever the dish of the day is when it comes to Scouse insults. But look, the Paddy that I know as a person is just a wonderful young man. You know, he's always been, you know, very charming, very polite, very easy to work with, and great to spend time with. Like, the guy is a fight nerd, like an absolute fight nerd. Like, you know, you got to remember he's been in the gym since he was 14. It's all he does. He's never had a job. He's all he's ever been is an athlete and a fighter, and he absolutely loves it. He's, you know, he loves his craft. He loves the sport. He will sit there and, you know, bring up a certain transition that Sakuraba pulled off against Vita Belfort in Pride back in the day, and they'll talk you through it like it just happened right in front of him. You know, you want to talk about someone who loves what he does. Paddy's at the top of that list. And look, you know, he's, you know, as far as being, you know, Paddy the person, you know, he's incredibly loyal. He's got his mates. He stands by them. He looks after them. He supports them. You know, if you come to a Cage Warriors show, obviously not this one in Manchester because he's going to be cutting weight and fighting himself in a couple of days' time. But, you know, normally you go to a Cage Warriors show in Manchester where there might be a guy from Next Gen making his pro debut, or, you know, Luke Riley or Adam Cullen, start to finish, cheering his mate on, not in the corner, cage side with the fans, cheering them on. He'll be at FCC. He'll be at any other regional show. He's part of the team. You know, Molly, exactly the same, cut from the very same cloth. I remember it was about a week before a pretty big fight she had in the UFC a few years ago, and she was at the EMA Four Nations tournament the weekend before, cornering all day from 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. They're just wonderful people, both Paddy and Molly. And I think a lot of the, to use a term that I hate, haters of Paddy, I think if they spent half an hour with him, they'd have a very different opinion.
Yeah, that's kind of my opinion as well, to be honest with you. I think people are just seeing sort of snippets of things that he said and all the rest of it. But all of my interactions with him have been top drawer, and he's just a fun guy to be around as well, and when he fights, the atmosphere he generates. I mean, something I wanted to ask you about sort of as a sort of a transition off from that is a Paddy walkout is always pretty special, and you've experienced a few of those in the past. But what have been your sort of most memorable moments, or your sort of most fond memories of calling fights to this point with Cage Warriors? You've seen some incredible fights, some absolute wars, some crazy walkouts, some mental stuff. I remember being at Night of Champions in the Apollo when Nicholas Dalby and Ross Houston, that fight had to be stopped because there was too much blood. I mean, I've never been in an arena where that has ever had to happen. And that's crazy. But from your sort of personal memories, what have been, I'm sure that wouldn't be your favorite necessarily, but I mean, what sort of magic moments would you put up towards the top of your list?
Yeah, I don't know if that one was a favorite. It certainly stands out though. Like I say, I've seen a lot of fights over the years, and I don't think I've ever seen the fight stopped from that before. So yeah, that was a mad one. And this sounds really gross, but you could smell it. Like you could smell that like a metally smell in the air. Nick Dalby's a good mate of mine. Known him for a very long time. And I think one of my favorite commentary memories was when he fought Sergey Churalov in Copenhagen, when he won the Cage Warriors welterweight title for the first time. And he knocked him out in the third round, I think it was, with this absolutely pitch perfect question mark kick, which he throws it a lot. He throws it to tease. It's one of those kicks as well where you're often landing with the foot, so it's not always a knockout kick. There was a guy in K1 years ago called Glaube Feitosa who used to knock people out really regularly with it, but it's generally not seen as like it's not like banging your shin off the side of someone's head. But he just caught him perfectly, and the guy went down, and I think I shouted something like Nicholas Dalby's the new Cage Warriors champion of the world. But I really got into it, and that was the first time I remember listening to commentary back and being like, I'm actually all right at this. Like, I actually think I could probably do this for quite a while. So who's this professional sounding person? Where's he come from? So yeah, that's certainly up there. I mean, Cage Warriors has been so good to me over the years. I've been to places. I've been to Chechnya, and that's just not a place you're ever going to visit. You're not going on the holiday to Chechnya. I don't think I particularly want to right now, but back then it was like, when am I ever going to get an opportunity to do this again? I've been all over the Middle East, some incredible places in Europe. Fight wise, you've got to talk about stuff like Josh Reed and Nathaniel Wood. Just one of the craziest 1-round fights in MMA history. An absolute privilege to call that. Mehdi Ben Lakhdar versus Joe McColgan at the Unplugged show at the BT studio. That was absolutely wild. The Jordanian crowds, like any fight with a local fighter, it was really weird. The atmosphere was better for the prelims when all the Jordanian amateurs were on than it was for the main card. And we actually got to a point where we would put Jarrah Al-Salawi's fights on after the main card as like a non-broadcast post-lim because of the atmosphere in the crowd whenever he fought. Apart from the time Carl Booth knocked him clean out, they shut up pretty quick then, but that's another story. I've seen some absolutely wild ones. To be honest, I don't think it's like necessarily just the fights. It's like the atmosphere and the people and the friends we make along the way.
It's a crazy, crazy sport that we're involved in. It really, really is. And it's going to be a big couple of weeks. We've got Cage Warriors 174 coming from London this weekend. You can catch that live on UFC Fight Pass. You've got Cage Warriors 175. Thursday, the following week, again, you catch that on UFC Fight Pass. And then obviously we've got UFC 304 taking place in the dead of the Manchester night on the following Saturday. Brad, it's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you. And keep having an unbelievable time on the mic. I'm looking forward to hearing. Although I won't catch it live this time because I'll be in the building, but looking forward to checking out your commentary after the fact. But thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, sir. It's been fun.